Just wanted to take a moment to discuss something that I noticed this week, okay? All right. All of us are looking at what's going on in the world, and if we're smart, with a certain amount of alarm, okay? And what's going on is this has caught a lot of people off guard with North Korea, okay? And this is probably in reaction to what's going on in the Ukraine, okay? All right. It is my contention that the next item on the menu will be a treaty between Iran and Russia, okay? And it will probably be, such as this, a mutual defense treaty, okay? Now, that was prophesied in the book of Daniel, okay? It talks about the king of Persia, which is Iran, and the king of the north. And just to let you guys know, if you get on Google Earth or look at a globe, you'll find that Moscow is literally almost due north of Jerusalem. All right, so we've known that treaty has been coming for a long time. Okay, we also have known that the battle of Gog and Magog has been coming for a long time. Okay, now where it ties in with the tribulation and the rapture, we don't fully know. But I'll never forget, years ago, Trina, we were talking about the Battle of Gog and Magog, and Trina said, well, we'll probably see that on CNN, or Fox, as the case may be. Okay, but the point being is that we're all looking at the world with anxiety, if you're smart, okay? But at the same time, we need to remember that none of this is catching God by surprise, okay? We are wrapping up, we are in the final run-up to the end times, okay? All right, which means that our redemption is drawing nigh.
The world is not falling apart, it's falling into place.
That's a good way to put it.
You're welcome.
Okay.
You can
That's a
think
free
that.
one.
It's true.
Okay, all right, now, let's move on. For those of you who were here, who were not here last week, a couple of things that I need to go back and re-explain is that most slideshows of basically take a chronological basis. They say, we went here, you see a few slides from city X, you talk about them a little bit, and then you move on to city Y, okay, which was the next one. That's not the way that we're doing this, okay? It's not overtly chronological, it's primarily theme-based, okay? Which is the reason why our next city is a city called Miletus, okay? Now, Miletus is in Turkey, okay? It is mentioned in Acts 20, okay? Miletus is a very prosperous town that was approximately 10 miles south of Ephesus, okay? All right, and it is where, after the events in Ephesus, and we're going to spend a lot of time on Ephesus, okay? After Paul was in Ephesus and went through his adventures there, okay, when he left after the riot, he went to a couple of places. He landed in Miletus on his way to Jerusalem, okay? And then basically the elders from from Ephesus came down, and he said goodbye to them, encouraged them, and off he went, okay? But there's a couple of valuable things for us as we go further on into this presentation that we can gain from Miletus, okay? Now, the first thing about Miletus is that, and this is once again getting back to last week, Miletus was built originally by the Greeks, okay? So that means that the original foundations were built somewhere in the 5th to 4th century before Christ, okay? It was a Hellenistic city. So once again, okay, remember, all those things that we see about the Romans that they've done that we're so amazed that they were able to do with what they had, okay, they were not the ones who developed it. The Greeks were the ones who came up with most of these ideas The Romans built upon them and became the conduits through which they came to us, all right? Now, one of the first things that the city did was they built out a grid system right there, okay? Do you guys see that? They actually had a grid system for what we would call today urban planning, okay? Now, the key here is that in addition to having the ability to figure that out, they also had the ability to move the earth so that they could in fact take uneven terrain and superimpose a workable grid system on that, okay? Now, the reason why they did, the way that they did that, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so impressed with these guys, because let's just say that we had a granite boulder right here, okay? Now, because we're ancient Greeks, we can look at the size of that boulder and know that it weighs pretty close to 400 pounds, okay? All right, even Chris probably cannot deadlift 400 pounds, okay? All right, okay, all right, much less the rest of us. Okay, to do that, you have to have a long piece of wood called a lever and a little place to put it called a fulcrum before you can move that rock, okay? Now, how long does that piece of wood have to be, and where do you need to place it? Place the fulcrum so that you in fact can move that rock, okay? All right, that's called geometry, okay? And those guys were experts in geometry, okay? And geometry is what allows you, your ability to do work, which literally the definition of work is you take something and you move it. That's work, if you talk about it to somebody who's got a degree in physics, okay? For us to do work in these bodies, the rate limiting step is the strength of our muscles, okay? Because of geometry, the rate limiting step becomes, what's the strength of this wood, okay? And I promise you, those guys used either oak or some other hardwood to do that, okay? That is the technology that these guys developed out of thin air to be able to do things like this, okay? And that's why I'm so impressed with these people. Now, once again, Miletus, you can see right here, they had their grid system, okay? They also had a series of bays. This was, the best way that I can describe it to you is I think that the geography of Miletus was similar to the geography of New Orleans down here in America, where you've got the seaport and it's got all this swampland around it and the river coming out and everything filling up, okay, and you have to dredge it all the time, okay? That was what these guys had, okay? All right, so what has happened today is that it's all filled up with silt, okay? And if you look, and Miletus today, or the remains of it, is basically on a plain that is exceptionally fertile farmland, okay? But at that point in time, what you had was a sheltered harbor, okay? All right, and interestingly enough, if you flip it upside down, it looks kind of like New York's harbor, okay? All right. Now, the main reason why I want you guys to learn about Miletus is the main structure there is an amphitheater, okay? All right, now, I want to talk about amphitheaters once again, okay? And the information that I'm going to give to you now will come into play later on, especially in Ephesus. But when Trina and I were prepping for this things, we were essentially auditing college level courses on the Greeks and the Romans, okay? And one of the professors said, building amphitheater, honest to goodness, I could not make this up. This is a guy with a PhD in Greek studies. And he says, building an amphitheater, all you had to do was find a place where the bedrock was close enough to the surface where you could cut out seats, and then you had an amphitheater, right? Right. Wrong. That ain't the way it is. It's much, much different from that. A whole lot more goes into it and we will see that when we discuss these amphitheaters. But this is the amphitheater at Caesarea, okay? Now, if you go to Israel, you will stand in this amphitheater, okay? And the first time that I stood in one in 1974, I can remember I was up somewhere here. We had one of our members singing down here, and honest to goodness, people, I could hear him as clear as a bell over the waves crashing, okay? All right, the most incredible thing, and I wonder how in the world they did that. Well, here's what they did. There's another aspect of geometry, and you guys know how our satellites, they have this arc that reflects the radio waves, and then they focus at a focal point, a parabola and a focal point, another facet of geometry, okay? All right, we use it that way. These guys use it the exact opposite, okay? Once again, geometry, and once again, these guys were not idiots, okay? They were very intelligent people, all right? Now, just remember that. All right, this is the amphitheater at Miletus, okay? Now, once again, for you, those of you who were here last week, this section was built by the Greeks. It's Hellenistic.
You said this section, what's?
The floor down here, okay? The floor down here was built by the Greeks. This part up here was built by the was rebuilt by the Romans around 1 to 200 AD. And then the Byzantines put this in sometimes after 400, okay? That's a very common event when you go to the Middle East, okay? All right, another shot, okay? Okay, now, if you'll notice the shirt, okay? All right, this is our tour guide, and I'm gonna put in a plug for Randy right now, okay? All right, Randy has been involved in tours now for quite a few years, all right? One of the unmentioned benefits is that lady's name, we called her Mel, okay? And the company, okay, according to Randy, she was the best tour guide that they had, okay? So we got a very good experience from her, and that's an advantage of Randy. He's got one of the advantages of going with Randy is in addition to his intellectual cachet, he's got relationships in this industry. So if you choose to go to the Middle East, then there's a lot of good reasons to go with him, okay? Now, the other thing I want you guys to get from this slide is right here, these curvatures of the seats, okay? All right, Mel mentioned in passing, okay, that apparently they were so good at what they did that curvature actually helped with the acoustics in the stadium too, okay? I don't know how, but the bottom line is that these structures, given the materials that they had to work with, were truly astounding, okay?
Just my intuition is that the sound that just went past you is being reflected back to you, and it's following that curve.
A distinct possibility, okay? And the answer is I don't know, okay? All right, now, one of the interesting things about Miletus is that they have, okay, the archaeological term is graffiti, okay? And honest to goodness, they have people in archaeology that go and just look at what people have chiseled into stones and read it and try and learn about the people, okay? All right, and this one right here, this says reserved for Jews and God-fearers, okay? So we do know, and I did not fully understand that distinction, but apparently a God-fearing Greek was an individual who really bought into the worship of the Jehovah, but they didn't want to get circumcised, or as you would say, they didn't want to pay the ultimate price, okay? So they figured staying out in the court of the Gentiles was just fine by them, so that they didn't have to have surgery, okay? But apparently these guys were very strong members of the Jewish community, okay? All right, so anyway, though, we do know that at least that they sat in a place, okay? All right, now another place, and you guys also need to understand, this Miletus has been, I mean, it has not been excavated very much. I mean, this is almost like going to a new dig, this stuff, okay? All right, now Trina, I think I'm gonna let you talk about this because you liked it so much better, okay? Trina was talking to Kara about this, just nattering away happily about it. So.
Well, go back to that map where you
Sure.
show everything. This site, okay, was very undeveloped, so you felt like you were like the first discoverers of it. They did have a small, the Turkish government now invests so much money in these various sites. This one is like kind of who goes to Miletus, so it's very undeveloped. So it had, you know, the romance, the enchantment of archaeology in the ancient world. This one had that. You felt like you were the first ones. We were on the ground were pottery shards. One guy in our group found one. Dr. Price sort of estimated the age was like maybe 300 BC on that one. I think it was BC. Anyway, the tour guide did tell us up there at the top of the screen, you see the Lion Harbor. Okay, she said that's where when the Apostle Paul, the Bible uses the phrase, and Paul went to Miletus. And I think that's sort of he met the elders from Ephesus there. They had a meeting in Miletus, and then he left to go elsewhere. So, but you don't realize when you just read Paul went to Miletus what Miletus was. Yeah. So he arrived, she said, at the Lion Harbor, and then that next word on the right, Delphinium.
Maybe you can point to it.
But you see the word Delphinium there? Okay, so he arrived here, the ship came into the harbor, which none of that is there, there's no water there now. Okay, and then here is a temple. Okay, bring up that temple.
Sure.
This is, so we had walked through all this sort of wildness in a way.
Yeah.
We get to this shimmering pond, and then and you see this beautiful little Greek temple across this pond. And it was just like enchanting in the way the sun was hitting the water. This massive turtle comes crawling out and is walking over into the distance. But the Apostle Paul would have come in at the Lion Harbor, disembarked. He would have walked past this temple, because this is a temple to Apollo, I think it is.
Yeah.
And it took you down, I don't know, maybe 35 or 50 miles away to the oracle at Delphi. So, and they were connected. So the worshipers did this walk. So the Apostle Paul would have seen this, possibly in its glory, you know? And there were also philosophers in this town, 3 main ones, I don't remember their names. So it really gave you, this site in particular, gave you the feeling that you could just have seen the Apostle Paul walking by, because it was remote. Some of the sites were in cities built around them. This was just out in the country, and nobody around but some dogs, you know, a little tiny shop. It was really remote, but that was like just enchanting that part of that temple. So anyway.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, and I'm sorry, Trina, I kind of put Trina on the spot, but y'all should have heard her last night at supper, just happily nattering away to Kara about how, and this is true. I mean, this was, I mean, the clouds were reflecting in the sky. I mean, it was
You just
truly
felt like you were
gorgeous.
in the ancient world,
Right.
and you saw where the Apostle Paul sailed in, where he had to have seen this. You know, well, a lot of things we went, he would have seen, but
Oh, yeah.
this was so wild, it was just like.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and we'll talk about that
Anyway.
later.
Was it a
Okay.
dirt road that
A
was?
path, it was a path.
Well, it was a
And
little
what-
path there.
Go to the
When you
next-
get into Miletus, you took a bus,
See,
right?
right, and they had a very small, entry,
Gate.
yeah, well, house, kind of a little house across the road. It was just sort of deserted feeling, cause there was
Yeah.
really nobody in there.
Yeah,
And they did have, in Miletus, they did have, a little sort of restaurant and then like a little gift store, very minor compared to the other places. They didn't have a lot of vendors, cause a lot of places had all these vendors.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
all
This
dirt
did
roads, dirt roads going into the.
No, they were paved.
That, well, the.
I mean, they were paved. I mean, you
Yeah.
could get there. I
Wasn't
mean,
a main road.
Yeah, it's not unknown.
Yeah.
It's just they can't get to it,
Yeah,
okay?
cause it's not that,
Okay.
Ephesus, Miletus, where you're gonna
Okay.
put your money.
Right, and there are the remains of Romans roads. Now, I don't have it in this presentation, but I've got a shot, Casey, Randy's daughter-in-law, okay, I've got a shot of her and Gigi as they're checking out a Roman road, okay, but we'll
Yeah.
talk about roads later.
Okay, what's the next shot? Is that Miletus, the next one?
No, this is just another a
Yeah,
shot.
that's the Baths at Miletus.
Yes, yeah.
This one. But that's what, the whole area looked like this. That's what we walked on. And there was this giant chameleon that John picked up. But the stones, I mean, there were just stones, like just,
Yeah.
so you knew that was like some building that had fallen or there was stuff under the ground.
Anyway, though, the next thing that comes up, now we don't see a whole lot of them, but was common in the Roman Empire, was public baths. This is what they would do is they had 4 separate baths, cold, tepid, and hot water, okay?
And men and women were separate.
I don't remember, I don't know, okay, probably, okay, I think they separated out men and women by time, but
Yeah.
these guys were, you know, anyway, we'll get them. I think that's the hot water bath right there, okay? But that was a typical thing that you would see in a Roman city, especially if there was a gymnasium around, okay? Now, right up here was where the river god was, which was Maendros, okay? And the name of the river, believe it or not, was Meander. It was the Meander River, okay, and we get that term, okay? And that is the river that filled up that area, okay? And I will tell you right now, I don't know if we'll have one, but the farm soil that I saw in Turkey, I mean, it's the only thing I've ever seen that compares with it is either the eastern shore of Virginia or Iowa. I mean, it's truly astoundingly productive land. All right, now,
Okay, that's,
all right, right through there, those structures, those are probably docks that the ship's tied up to, okay? And you can see they're on dry land now. Now, I think that's what our tour guide told us, but I will tell you this, on the land when we were walking around, we found seashells. Okay. Okay, all right, now let's move on. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna move back to Greece. You've gotten specifically about amphitheaters, and that I believe that you need to know to understand further things. I believe that I have conveyed how much I respect the intellect of these people, okay? All right, what they did, now, don't get me wrong, they've not built an international space station, but what they did with what they've got to work with is truly astounding. All right, now, Athens, okay? We spent a day or two in Greece, okay? And the big thing on day one was the acropolis. Now, Most cities in that era had an acropolis. All it means is city on the hill. Okay. However, if you hear somebody say the acropolis, this is what you're talking about right here in Athens. Okay. Now, what I want you to get a couple things from these two slides. The first thing is that Park Avenue, which is a high rent district in New York City. Okay. The Park Avenue of Athens surrounds the Acropolis, okay? You can tell that it's a high rent area, okay? The other thing, the next thing I want you to get is...
Before you move on, you know, on the left side, that's kind of like old selfie, right?
Huh?
That's old selfie, right?
Yeah.
The shadow.
No, okay. Well,
Thousands of years old.
I would have preferred to have used a different slide, but this gets across what I want to say. All right, number one, you see the difference there between the two marbles? Okay, all right, this is the sidewalk, this is the roadway, okay? Their idea of sidewalks was to use different marble. I mean, these guys were real marble snobs, okay? The second thing is that you can see the steps up to the Acropolis are made of marble.
And that's only part of them. You walk steps, you walk more steps. I mean,
More steps. Yeah, it's not, let's just say you had to be motivated to go up to the Acropolis.
because the elevator, we think, was broken, the bathrooms were closed, it's just, you don't really know what to expect.
Yeah, anyway, but let's not scare them off, Bob.
It was worth it.
All right, yeah, it was. Now, the other thing that I want you guys to see right here is, anybody want to take a guess what that is?
Olive tree.
That's right, excellent, okay. Now, the mythology of Athens is that there was a contest between Athena and either Neptune or Poseidon. I think it's Neptune was their god, okay? And basically, the city elders said to these two gods, which one of you should we worship? In other words, make us an offer, okay? All right. Neptune made his offer, okay? Then Athena came along, offered him olive trees, and they said, sold, okay? All right, so that became, hence the city became Athens, okay? Now, I want you guys to understand, now we all know that olives are a big part of that culture, okay? But I want there to be no misunderstanding between us, okay? Olives were, the best way that I can describe it to you is, you guys know how central petroleum products are to our economy, okay? Imagine something that was so intrinsic to their economy, in addition being able to use it to make things, they were also able to consume it, okay? Okay, as a carbon source, okay? All right, that is how intrinsic olives were to the economy of that world, okay? All right, now this slide right here, once again, I wish I had gotten a better shot, but the Acropolis, the land on the Acropolis was not level. It had to be leveled out. My brother-in-law, the contractor, could probably look at this and tell you exactly what's going on, okay? I cannot. The bottom line is that these guys had, yeah, okay.
Making sure we were talking.
Yeah, okay. I only have one brother-in-law, so.
I didn't know
Your
that.
sister has a husband.
Yeah, but he's, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about him. Okay, sorry about that.
So what's the point of that picture?
Okay, okay.
What's the point of that picture?
The point of the picture is that, and I don't want you to, Mark, but you could probably recognize some of the things that they did. They had very sophisticated techniques. Okay, all right, this is the Acropolis. This is the Parthenon. This is the temple to Athena, or what's left of it. It's really wild. They're rebuilding it right now. You can see their scaffolding. In addition to being marble snobs, these guys were also, the Greeks are also ancient site snobs too. If you've got a structure and it's not either 75 or 85% complete, they're not gonna rebuild it, okay? All right, and they will tell you point blank that they consider what's going on in Turkey to be Disneyland for adults, which,
Well, it's not that they can't, they won't.
yeah,
The roof of this thing apparently was wood, and earthquakes destroyed a lot of it.
Yeah.
Plus the Turks years later stored gunpowder in it and it blew up. But, if 75% of the original materials are there, the Greeks will put it back. If not, they leave it out. Whereas the Turks will fill in with new material, but the Greeks don't wanna do that.
yeah.
And are you gonna tell them about the columns?
I'll get there. Okay, all right. I'll get there, sweetie. Okay. All right. Okay, now this is a shot of Athens. Okay, once again, there's marble going all the way up. Okay, now remember this shot because it'll come up again. All right, this is probably what the acropolis looked like. Okay. All right, there's the Pantheon of the gods. That structure that actually, okay, you can still see fragments of it right there when you're standing there. Okay, all right, but that's the Pantheon of the gods, and that's just not, and that's not abstract. That tells a story, several stories. Okay, that is probably what the statue of Athena looked like. Now, as far as I can tell, based upon what I could put together, I think there were two statues of Athena there. You had this one, which was very tall and external, and then you had one inside the temple itself that also involved a reflecting pool and apparently caught the sunlight in the morning as it came up.
You can see why Nebuchadnezzar got so excited about Daniel's vision of the statue.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna have one like that.
Yeah, that's
Well, it
that's
was
good.
made of gold and ivory, so, I mean, after you climb all those steps up there and to see that dazzling statue, I mean, the pilgrims would be like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a laser hologram of what they think Athena looked like. Okay, now, one of the places that you could see was Mars Hill, which is right through here, okay? All right, now I just put
What is
that.
the relationship with the Parthenon and Mars Hill?
you look
You
down.
can see, yeah, you look,
Down.
yeah, the bottom line is you can see them both from each other. Mars Hill is lower than the Acropolis, okay? Remember, the Acropolis, the Acropolis, I cannot think of an exception to this, you're probably looking at the highest point in the city, okay? All right, and that's the plate to with Paul's speech on Mars Hill. Now, one of the other advantages of
That's Dr.
going,
Price.
yeah,
He dressed up as Paul.
he did.
And John read the scripture, and these other tourists started gathering around.
Yeah.
Cause they didn't know, see, yeah, I mean, that's our group.
yeah.
Now, do you have any speculation as to why on the previous slide there's this inscription of Paul's sermon? In other words, is it because now they're saying, oh, all these Christians are interested, Christian tourists, or was there some sort of veneration for this?
I don't know, okay? What I can tell you is that plaque has been there for a long time.
Yeah.
I unfortunately lost it, but somewhere I have a slide of me standing next to it in 1974 on a cloudy day, okay? And
When
it's
you
in
say it
Greek.
was there in 74?
It was there in 74.
Well, I mean, when do you think?
Huh?
I assume that you meant like hundreds of years.
I think you
Oh, the
need-
plaque, well,
I
it's
don't know.
No,
See,
but
the, well, the
that's
Greek
what you
Orthodox, the Greek
Then
Orthodox.
My question would be, what version?
Yeah. But they would recognize.
It was Greek, Koine,
Yeah.
it was certainly Koine Greek.
74 AD.
That's what I was hoping.
When he was there. But see, it's a recognized site. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think there's any dispute that Paul spoke on Mars Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah, my question was, is this just kind of catering to the Christian tourists, or does the culture somehow acknowledge
the
this?
Greek Orthodox would.
I have no
Yeah.
idea.
They're-
I cannot answer that.
Yeah.
They obviously recognize it somehow.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Right, before the liberals got hold.
Right.
All right, okay, now, here's the point. Paul is there at Mars Hill, okay? He goes through his thought process where he basically says, dudes, you guys are worshiping a whole lot of gods here, okay? You even got a little memorial or a little altar to the unknown God. Permit me to educate you, would be the legal term, okay? So he goes through. Now, here's the thing, all right? And does not live in temples built by human hands, okay? When he said that, he may very well have looked over and seen that, or something like that.
See, is Mars still in that picture?
Trina, I don't know, okay? The point being is that something like this from some angle is in fact what he saw, and Paul was saying, dudes, this is all well and well, he probably wasn't even saying that, but basically what he's saying is, you see that right there? Okay, all right, okay. I think that in that culture, there was some expectation that those temples were indwelt in some way, shape, or form by the deities that they were dedicated to. Now, this is going to come up again later on, okay, when we get to Pergamon. But the point being here is that Paul is saying, we worship a God that transcends all of this. Okay, all right, and you guys need to get on the boat, okay? All right, now, does that make sense? All right.
Well, I would add to that, it's not merely that God doesn't live in the temple, he transcends it, but it's also the contrast between the theistic God and those gods who are like the God of water and all that sort of stuff. So God not only transcends the temple, he transcends these gods because he's not part of the universe. He created the universe.
Okay, all right. Number one, thank you very much. Number two, hold on to that thought because we are coming back to it, okay?
Well, and then I think too, with temples made with human hands, there's such a irony in that
Yeah.
you've carved your own God, basically, and they were all around, statues everywhere.
Okay.
And Paul's like, this God doesn't reside in a temple just made with people.
People, the boss, keep that thought. I'm telling you.
All right.
This is coming up in Pergamon when we get back, which is like 2 or 3 churches down the road. Okay. All right.
Okay.
And this is a little tidbit for you guys as well. Remember, there is some place, I think that where God says he says to Nathan, when David says, I want to build God's temple, and Nathan says, sure, go ahead. God's let you do everything you wanted to do. Goes to bed. God says to David, sorry, Nathan, you need to tell David to go back and reevaluate his Gantt chart. And one of the things that he said is, look, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't live in a temple. So,
Let me just say too, though, getting back to Paul, in this front area, I don't know, Mars Hill, maybe that temple is not there. I don't know, but Mars Hill, when Paul, like Dr. Price, the way he was standing talking to our group, he was facing that acropolis.
yes.
So the value of going instead of just seeing pictures, because we were standing on that rock
Right.
too down there. You turn around and you look up, and the Apostle Paul saw that's supposed to be the most perfect building from the ancient world. There's no straight lines in it, because when they made it visually correct.
That's coming
And
up.
you're probably getting that. But anyway,
yeah.
but it really makes that speech, because when you're standing there and you see that temple with it, Athena was in there, and they had no scripture. They had nothing. Paul was the first missionary there, and then the early church, the others came. So that was the first time these people had heard of the real God. And it's like, hit you when you're
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
Is this affiliated with the church? Is this one of the, this is one of the 7 churches you're
No,
leading up to?
no, we went to, see, part of the tour, this is where we didn't really, it was called the Turkey.tour, okay? But then there was a small line that said, some footsteps of Paul. So where Paul went, we went to a few of those sites, like we were in Corinth, we did go to Patmos. But the main tour was the 7 churches, and all of them are in Turkey. So, but we went to these, you know, the sites.
All right, let's,
Yeah.
we're starting to get a little short on time, okay? Has your question been answered? Okay. All right, now,
Oh, there you go.
okay, true craftsmanship, okay? We're talking about work ethics now. Let me tell you about true craftsmanship. This is the Parthenon, the temple to Athena, okay? Now you really, okay, if you will notice, and you really can't see it, but the steps are a little bit curved, just a little bit off kilter. What happened was when the Greeks first started building temples like this, they'd step back, they'd say, it looks crooked. So they'd measure it, and they were square. So what they did was, as their craftsmanship increased, is they'd say, you know, and I'm sure they didn't do this I'm sure that it was not just random looking at it. I'm sure that they measured it in angles. Okay, all right, now if we offset this just a shade like that, and do the concave of the steps just a little bit from a distance, it'll look straight. Okay, all right, that's what they did. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, that is true craftsmanship.
And getting back to your earlier point about the mathematics, that was mathematics that did that. And can you imagine how complex
I know.
that would have been just to do a little,
Yeah.
so that across the way it looks
Yeah.
straight.
Yeah.
And the same with the columns, they are not absolutely straight. I want to say they either lean slightly back or maybe it's slightly back, so that from the distance, it all appears
Yeah.
perfect, but they're not straight.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly astounding, okay?
And I wonder also if this had a relationship to the earthquakes, like now we make buildings earthquake tolerant. They didn't know about it, but by tilting these things, I wonder if that kind of.
Yeah, I don't think so, no. What
If
happened?
it is, we
Because
don't
no
know.
one knows. This has stood the test of those earthquakes.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
not
that-
totally. And they put those, I call them donut sections together with lead posts, and they snapped them together.
Okay.
Well, that rusted out. So they had decay because of things like that. The earthquakes, the Turks stored gunpowder in this building. It blew up.
A mortar round hit it, kaboom.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
right.
you know,
All right,
it's
let's-
they
yeah, let-
really,
Yeah.
are you gonna talk about the Turks, about the Turks?
I'll get
Okay.
there.
I don't know where you're headed.
Darling. Okay, I'm sorry, we need to coordinate a little bit better. Anyway, though, another source of craftsmanship is this is the old temple of Athena, okay? All right, you see those 4, whatever they were, Vestal Virgins or whatever, okay? All right, well, they all had to be beautiful, okay? And one of the classic marks of Greek beauty is a thin neck. So somebody did the math and came to the conclusion, if we give these girls thin necks, they won't be able to support the roof. So what they did was they gave them huge heads of
I was
hair.
gonna say, big hair.
Yeah, okay, which in addition to improving them aesthetically, also increased the tensile strength of the structure so that it could hold the roof up.
And the one thing our guide, this was in the museum at the bottom of the, if you'll go back, at the bottom of the Acropolis.
I don't,
There, well, okay, this one, or
This
the
one?
next, or the next one.
that one,
No, in the museum.
I don't.
They-
Just talk, Trina,
Okay.
okay.
You cannot see the back of these when they're up against that wall in situ.
Oh.
They
Right
carved the
there.
backs
That-
of the dresses
Yeah.
into hair. No, that's not it.
Yeah, no, but it shows it. Here's the front, here's the back.
Well,
where
right.
Nobody could see it.
Well, that was maybe on the pediment, but, so the Greeks just thought the back should be as beautiful as the front.
Even though nobody could see it.
Yeah. And an interesting thing about carving the marble, they chiseled it, and then the way they made it, they smoothed it was emery. the mineral emery, and apparently there's a lot of emery mines in Greece. And so that's how they got the fine,
Yeah.
you
It's
know,
almost like
Very
this.
cool.
smoothing. Yeah, it
Okay.
is like, you know.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, an interesting thing about living in a city in Europe, in cities like this, it's an odd mix of the old and the new. You've got the modern, not subway, but the modern transport right next to the old structures. Okay. Okay, now, let's talk about Corinth in the remaining 5 minutes that we've got. Corinth was mentioned in Acts 18, okay? Now, Corinth, let me see here. Okay, was right here, okay? Corinth was the Panama Canal,
And where was Athens?
right up there,
Okay.
okay? So they're close, okay? All right, I mean, really with the Greeks, with the Greeks, if you weren't seafaring, you weren't jack, okay? That was, water was one of their big things, okay? All right, but this was the Panama Canal of the Greek world, because you had two choices. You could either go around like that, or you could go across, okay? All right, and we see that even today. Probably the two largest artificial choke points in the world for sea travel are the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. As recently as World War II, when Monty beat back Rommel at Alamein, if Rommel had broken through there, he would have taken the Suez Canal, and that would have had catastrophic implications for Britain in World War II, okay? Because then they would have had to sail around Africa, okay? All right, so you had two choices. You could either sail around, or you could go to this town, okay, and they would put your ship up on this road, and I think this was one of the roads that they actually used. You put it on what was essentially a cart, okay, and I'm sure that they had more than one, and then they would use pulleys, which is an application of geometry, to drag it across the land, okay? That was about a one-day process, okay? Consequently, it was a seaport town, and they say it was notable for its excesses, I guess we could say, okay? All right, now, the key here to take away about the Corinthians is Paul went to this town, okay? And when he was preaching there, if you read Acts, God actually says to him, do not be afraid. I have got many people in this town, okay? So there was a thriving church in Corinth. And when we talk about the Corinthian church, I think one thing we need to keep in mind is we always think in terms of 1 Corinthians, okay, where Paul lists these grungy things that they're doing and says you should stop doing them, okay? And we say, boy, these guys make me look good, okay? All right, well, here's the thing. You need to go on to 2 Corinthians, where these guys, for their faults, they responded appropriatly and repented from their sin. So these guys, despite their problems, they had a lot of good in them as well, okay? All right, let me see here. There's another shot of the road, okay? All right, now unfortunately, I cannot remember, but this was a bema seat that was dedicated to the guy who provided the money for it, and believe it or not, he's mentioned in the scripture somewhere, okay? And I cannot remember his name. An obligatory temple, okay, and right up here is the acropolis of Corinthians, okay, and this is Corinth today, okay? Now, we can laugh about their technology back in that day, but it wasn't until the 1800s that we had the ability to do something better, okay? And today, as far as channels go, that's kind of piddly. That's kind of a piddly channel.
But this is an old channel, right?
It was built in the 1800s.
Okay.
All right, I think it was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who did it. Okay. Now, okay, next week we start with Ephesus. Any questions?
I have a broader question that keeps on coming to mind. A friend of ours here is Greek. He's from Corinth. His family's from Corinth.
We'll preview things to come.
But, you know, as being in the financial business, if you will, or having not much knowledge about it, you know, Greece is bankrupt. They have
Yes,
it
absolutely.
Today. And relative to the end times that we talk about, you know, you've got the Greeks, the Romans, and the Brits, and so on and so forth. They all have a level of height and then a fall, which is where I think the United States obviously is heading. So China's probably the most rapturous that will be the next dynasty.
Actually, I disagree with you on that.
I don't know. I'm just saying that's what people are saying. So that,
All right.
I'm hoping that's not the case.
Well,
Anyway, so is there what happened to Greece? I mean, is this a spiritual? I mean, or, you know, how can you be so elevated in intelligence and in geometry and math and so on and so forth, and then just give it up and just be able to just fall to today?
That's the prophecy of Daniel, the 4 kingdoms, and Greece was one of those kingdoms.
That's my question, yes.
Well, they went through
But that
a
was,
dark age.
God's timing is so long.
Yeah, we can look it up. This is the crazy thing, and I don't remember the details, but Greece was in this dark age.
correct.
And it's almost like that entire culture would have just been forgotten. But there was we'll look it up, there was some discovery or some event where they started piecing that culture back. It was really strange how it was almost like a big swath of it would have just been forgotten.
Yeah, but Jonathan's point is just that they were world dominant, and now they're nothing other than a
Right.
talking point. I mean, they
Yeah.
still exist,
Yeah.
but they're not a power.
Well, they're more than
Right.
talking point,
Yeah.
but the point remains, and the answer is I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, and they were colonizers, so they had colonies all around the Mediterranean. You know?
Yeah.
And then the Romans would come and take them, because our Greek guide, to this day, we had the lady who was our guide in Greece, because we had the lady in Turkey, the one in Greece, she teaches archaeology, brilliant woman.
Yeah.
She says to us while we're in Greece, and this is sort of like the old ancient feelings coming out of the Turks and
Yeah.
the Greeks.
Actually,
She
not
goes-
so ancient, okay?
Well, it's still there. She said, Graham and I were having some questions to her sort of as an aside, and she said to us, okay, because we were still in Greece, we're getting ready to head to Turkey. She goes, okay, when you go to Turkey, she goes, they're gonna talk about the Greek gods, Nike, Artemis. They'll talk about all that. They're not gonna tell you about the genocide that
Yeah.
they did of the Greeks.
Yeah.
And that is what happened. The Romans would come, all these little Greek colonies, and they would just wipe them out. And the people or whatever, and take over the culture. And then the Persians came. Keeping it straight is like thousands of years of the Greeks, the Persians, Egypt, all this, you know. She did make a comment though, which is this.
She was the one that told us the Turks had Disneyland for adults. by the
Yeah,
way.
well, she, you know, made comments that where you realized that the Greeks were like democracy started there, and then all the beauty, and then the theater. The Romans didn't have that.
No.
And so it was kind of like she made the comment. She goes, when you look at all the Greek sculptures and all this, she said, you will never see a Greek warrior with his foot on the
world.
neck of a conquered enemy.
Or the world, which
The
we will
Romans,
see
yeah.
next week, God willing.
So the Greeks, it all of a sudden you started to put together what this was an amazing culture. Not that they didn't fight, you know what I mean, but the Romans were seen far more barbarian.
Well,
and the
Graham said
Persians.
we don't know the answer why, but
Yeah.
I'm saying the answer is in Daniel, and it's all about the sovereignty of God.
Okay.
Not just the predictability of God, but God in control, and God made these kingdoms rise and he made them fall.
Yeah, yeah.
And what,
But, yeah.
the four empires or one?
Well, Babylon was the first, then the Medes and the Persians, then the
Right.
Greeks, then the Romans.